You are listening to SPN, the Sports Podcasting Network.
من هناك لشوارزنيجر
Ya lo hace, pierna derecha, directo al arco, golazo, golazo, golazo.
This is Soccer Today, live on SPN Radio, your new live show about the beautiful game in all its glory, with Duane, Rollins and Kevin Laramee. MLS, EPL, La Liga, Champions League, all is fair game. Powered by the Sports Podcasting Network. Visit us at sportspodcastingnetwork.com.
Welcome to another day of Soccer Today. I'm Duane Rollins. Joining me is Kevin Laramee, as always. But on the line to start the show, there's some breaking news last night in the breaking news that's almost fiction. It seemed
Weird
like
breaking news. Feels like it comes out of April Fool's, right?
Yeah, or basically the 1970s in the NASL, but it is not the 1970s, and it is the NASL though. Rayo OKC, a lot of mess going on down there. Joining us on the line is the managing editor of 55-1, Wes Duane, to talk about that. Wes, how are you?
I'm doing all right. I'm with you on enjoying, or not really enjoying, but kind of bizarrely reading through all the events, things coming out of Oklahoma City.
Yeah. Why don't you set it up for us? If someone's new to this, they've just woken up they weren't around last night when this was breaking. Can you just let the listeners know what exactly is happening to the best of your ability?
To the best of my ability is right. Well, I should say that there's a guy named James Poling, who people should check out on Twitter. He writes for the Oklahoman, and he's the guy who kind of has put most of this together for people. So a few weeks ago now, I forget when, but one of Rayo OKC's owners, Sean Jones, who's basically the local owner of Rayo OKC, pulled out of the club ownership because the Spanish owners of Rayo had basically tried to, or had quite clearly that they want that the end is nigh for the club, and they've been cutting back on some costs. And so last night, this weird news came about where the club, Rayo, look, all of our turf, our artificial turf that we put on top of the artificial turf at the high school stadium where we play has been stolen. They alerted the police, and then finally it came out that Sean Jones, this former owner, had taken some of the turf because he had previously paid for it himself and had heard erroneously or for whatever reason that Rayo OKC was planning to sell this turf. And as things have shaken out, it seems like there was a miscommunication between some of the parties, and that perhaps Joan Buchholz, who was just recently brought in as kind of a caretaker general manager of the club, misspoke, going to sell them. They weren't going to sell them, and Sean Jones had overreacted or reacted correctly. But it's basically just a mess. And yeah, you had at one point where 40 of the 92 artificial turf squares were missing, and they were stolen and hidden away by the owner who had paid for them.
Okay. This is a lot to sort of wrap our head around. And I said that it screams of the old days of the NASL, or sort of fly-by-night operations and all that. So I guess I'll just ask you in general, as someone who follows the NASL very closely, what does this say, this incident, this kind of, laughs aside, what does it say about the strength and the stability of the NASL as a league right now?
Well, I would say that if it feels to listeners or to observers that this is an old relic, that maybe we perhaps have been kidding ourselves about lower division soccer in the U.S. and Canada. The USL has been doing quite well. NASL has grown a lot, but let's not kid ourselves. There are a lot of ownerships in both the USL and NASL that are just pretty Mickey Mouse in general. And we've gotten away from most of that, but there's some pretty crazy stuff that have those leagues. And I think that we tend to see the FC Cincinnati successes or things like that, or the Indy 11 successes, and maybe kind of forget that there's a lot of people that they're just wasting on soccer teams and they don't know what the hell they're doing. But I should say that Rayo OKC, what it does tell us about NASL is that for some reason they made the absolutely boneheaded decision to go into there was no reason to do it. I think every impartial observer of the league be a failure. Going into the season, I had spoken to some people who said they were not even sure if this team would even put players out on the pitch. That it was that bad, that they did not know what they were doing. And so what it says about the league is that the league, to recent trends, is making boneheaded decisions about ownership that used to happen. It was not unheard of to have these kind of crazy bad owners come into the league. Made a big mistake here, and I think that they're going to pay big coming to, even if Rayo OKC disappears next year, it's going to have big knock-on effects for the league.
When you're looking at the Oklahoma City situation, Wes, anybody between the offseason, we all had the same questioning, and we all talked about it. Like, okay, so if we think about a city in the United States that deserves a second soccer team to have that battle of the two soccer markets, Oklahoma was way down the pecking order of the answer of that question. Now this leaves the reason behind it. Is it because of the pressure of the USL, because it is the fastest growing soccer league in the world? Is it the pressure of that league growing and breathing down your neck that forces the NASL, or forced the NASL, to go ahead with those type of ventures and those very risky ventures? But it got some attention, it got some it got some press. Is it that pressure of the USL, quote unquote, breathing down the neck of the NASL D2 NASL to take those decisions a few months ago?
I think that's part of it. The USSF rules, which state that the league, Division II, needs teams in the Pacific time zone, Central time zone, and Eastern time zone. And San Antonio recently left the league. Minnesota is leaving the league this year. And with Rayo, with those two gone, NASL knew that Minnesota was going to be leaving. They knew that they would need a central time zone. Next year, they'll have a Pacific time zone team with the San Francisco Deltas. And so they could, go into next year, 2017, having a central time zone team. So I think that they knew that they needed certain things to meet standards, and I think then maybe panicked. Maybe it's not panicked, but they certainly, I don't think in a regular situation would have wanted Rayo in the league, but in order to meet some standards. But you're also right that USL has been breathing down their neck, and I have my certain opinions about USL and having reserve teams in it, but they've had very little turnover. They've got two clubs going out this year, but they've been remarkably good at putting together good ownership groups.
Wilmington, if I'm not mistaken, the second escapes me. Where does that leave the NASL now at the end of the season and next season, Wes? What do you feel? Does it change the optics, the famous perception of the league? Does it change anything to that league? Is it going to be harder to attract owners? There's been rumors of the California surf resurfacing, and they're going to need teams in the West the West Coast. So where does that leave the NASL now that we are experiencing this type of season? We have the Rayo debacle. We had earlier this year Fort Lauderdale with trouble of payments as well. So where does that leave the NSL?
I don't know. The question that I have asked and a couple others have asked is, if you're several $1 million to spare, lots of $1 million to spare, where would you put? Would you go to the USL or would you go to the NASL? And I can't think of a reason why you would go to the NASL unless you want another team in Florida or something. The travel is prohibitive. I don't know. You don't get the same kind of status out there or eyes on your team as you do in the USL, because people are watching the USL too now. So if I'm someone like Ottawa or Jacksonville, Tampa, on the phone, at least talking to USL and seeing if they're interested in you defecting. And I say that not gleefully, because even though my team, Minnesota United, is leaving NASL, I have a real affection for the league. I've watched it since its birth. Where they are going forward in terms of putting together really solid ownership groups and that makes sense for success.
Wes, was good to take some time in a busy schedule today. So this will be the last question on this, Wes. And I take a deep breath before I ask it. I saw some of your reaction to someone similar talking to you about this on Twitter last night, but it always needs to be asked when you're talking about NASL issues. Would these things happen, in your opinion?
They'd be happening and worse. I mean, if you're talking about bad ownership groups, people not understanding soccer and making terrible decisions, that would happen in spades far more than it happens now. So if you had ProRel, you'd have a lot more people making even riskier bets, and you'd be back to 10, 15 years ago, where, how many of the clubs that existed 15 years ago still exist now? Very few. I was looking at the 1995 schedule for the Minnesota Thunder yesterday, and only one team still exists, and that's the Des Moines Menace. I think that if, we can talk about ProRel all day, but basically what the USSF needs to do, and what all these leagues need to do, is figure out how do we work with people who are willing to lose money for a long ASL with Rio, and I think with Fort Lauderdale, have made bad decisions, desperate decisions. I don't think ProRel fixes that, because where's the money going to come from suddenly that will prop up these teams, that will let teams like Fort Lauderdale actually pay their players on time? I think that this is not a problem of competition. This is a much bigger problem.
We'll follow it, obviously, in the days ahead. We thank Wes. That's 55.1. That's all spelled out, so not the numbers. 55.1. You're the managing editor there. Thanks again, Wes.
Thank you, guys.
You are listening to SPN Radio, powered by the Sports Podcasting Network. Visit sportspodcastingnetwork.com for more.
And welcome back to Soccer Today. I'm Duane Rollins. Joining me on the line from Hippie Island is our friend Daniel Squizzato to talk about World Cup qualifying for Canada, Honduras. How you doing, Daniel?
Oh, I was pretty good up until the last few words of that sentence, and then the grim reality facing us kind of crashed down inside my head, and now I'm kind of having a bit existential crisis. Why don't we just talk our way through it, and we'll come out okay on the other side, hopefully.
That seems like a plan. An existential crisis is on the Voyager scarf. I don't know if people are aware of that, but that's what it says. It's
Is it kind of like one of those, you play a vinyl record backwards and it, tells you to worship the devil? Like if you read a Voyager scarf or you hold it in the right light, it just says existential crisis.
Yeah, it's kind of like one of those, those paintings from the 90s that if you stare at long enough, a sailboat pops out.
Yeah, the magic eye. I could never get those to work. Everyone's like, there's a horse. And I'm like, it just looks like nonsense to me. But maybe my eyes don't work properly.
Yeah, now that we've talked about one of the main plot points of Mallrats, that's there's some other 90s references there.
Yeah, boy, there are a lot of hashtag millennials tuning into this show and wondering what the hell's going on. Let me tell you kids about Crystal Pepsi the first time around.
There you go. Not Crystal Meth, Crystal Pepsi. Anyway.
It's okay. Never mind. Let's move on.
Let's move on. Okay, I guess we've avoided it long enough. San Pedro Sulu, what can they do to not have the same mess happen there? I want to start on that, and let's just get this out of the way. Like, should we be worried about 8-1 or not?
What can they do to avoid losing by 7 goals? Go out and play a competent game of soccer, I suppose. Not completely give up at halftime. Not leak goals like a ship that's been hacked to pieces with a hatchet. I'd reckon there's a whole lot that they could do to avoid losing by a scoreline of 8-1. Ideally, they don't lose by any scoreline. They either draw or, God forbid, get a win. But I think that if we're using the game 4 years ago as the benchmark of what to expect here, then I don't know how anyone is going to psychologically make their way through this. So, I mean, Duane, I know that you've said this. This team is not going to go lose 8-1 because whatever you can say about Benito Floro and his, tactical approach and his personnel selections, this is a team that has been built specifically not to lose this game 8-1. And so I'm not guaranteeing that they're not going to lose the game, but, well, I'm saying that, but who the hell would have thought they'd lose the game 8-1 4 years ago? So, look, it's going to be a competitive match. It's got players it's got a good mix of players, those who've played there before and know what to expect, and newcomers who aren't tarnished by what's befallen the team there before. So all we can hope on the day is that they're able to put it together and actually put themselves in contention the following Tuesday rolls around.
Players are going to say that they don't consider that they're living in the present. And athletes, to be fair to them, often do very much live in the present. They kind of go forward rather than look back. But to hear about it, to know about it, to be absorbed by it, because they're asked constantly. They're constantly being forced to remember that game. Do you think that there will be any lasting legacy on the pitch for those guys once that ball kicks off, or are they telling the truth when they say that there's not?
It's one of those indiscernible things, right? Undiscernible, indiscernible. One of those things that can't be discerned, in that it's you've got to think it's impossible for any of these guys to go out on the pitch on Friday and not somewhere in their minds be cognizant of what's happened in the past and be thinking about not wanting to repeat that. But is it something that's going to, in the way that they play, or the passes that they make, or the runs that they make? I don't think so. I mean, so much of what happens on the field is a matter of top level athletes making imperceptible split-second decisions in the moment. And so I think for us to over psychologize any of that is something we do at our own, it's folly, right? I mean, if the players are on the field on Friday, it's because it's 35 degrees with humidity of 90%, not because the game 4 years ago ended 8-1. I mean, if they are unable to finish chances, it's not because the game is in San Pedro Sula. It's because, hey, that's been a problem that's afflicted this team since long before Benito Floro ever showed up. And so I think that, as you said, a lot of this a lot of these storylines loom large, especially for us as followers of the team, because, we have nothing else to fill our times with. But for these players, most of them have been playing with their club this past weekend. They're traveling down. They're in training. They're going through the same routines as they would go through before any other game and before they know it, the game starts. So really, I think the people that are delving deepest into this spiral of woe is the likes of you and I and our esteemed listeners. And hopefully, by the time the game rolls around, everyone involved can have it worked out of their system and focus on the task at hand.
Could win 8-1.
I mean, yeah, I guess, it's, in like, I don't know, a series of flying pigs could descend onto the field and delay it, I mean, in the realm of things, confines of what is physically possible, yes, we could win the game 8-1. It's not going to happen, but insofar as it could theoretically happen, sure. I mean, if you buy into the multiverse theory, there will be a strain of the universe in which Canada wins that game 8-1. There's also going to be a strain of the universe where Benito Floro spontaneously transforms into a Charizard in the middle of the match and immolates everyone in the stadium. So I think that in the strain of the universe in which we live, what we can probably look forward to, as in it is coming, not necessarily that we are excited about it coming, is a tightly contested game where there's going to be, physicality, there's going to be very crucial referee decisions, and there's going to be a whole hell of a lot of biting of fingernails up here.
That Daniel Squizzato is writing an episode for Doctor Who season 10 are vastly overstated, I hear. So, but that was a good scenario that you played out there. The multi-universe, I like it. Our sci-fi fans are happy.
Yeah, I spent all those years writing those nice letters to Stephen Moffat, and then he just goes and buggers off. So now I've got to start from square one. So sorry, Whovians, you're not going to get my guest episode anytime soon.
All right, fair enough. Let's move to the roster itself. Jokes aside, the biggest talking point.
Jokes aside, here's a Canadian national team roster.
Oh dear God! All right, there are two main talking points, and some people out your way will claim that we're being Toronto centric when we bring them up, but I think that the one for sure is absolutely legitimate, and I'll start there, and that's the Will Johnson conversation. You had a chance to talk to Benito Floro about this. Tell the listeners what exactly what he said about why Will Johnson is not on this roster.
I'm going to paraphrase a lot of it. If folks want to read what Floro told me, they can head over to MLSsoccer.com. The story is up there. He talks about Will Johnson not being on the roster and several other elements of the game. There's always going to be a little because of the language barrier with Benito Floro. I mean, he does speak English. He has, in his time as head coach, has more and more tried to be self-sufficient when it comes to, he always has a translator nearby, but this call I did with him, we did the whole thing in English, and, I asked follow-ups as best I could, but all of that is background noise to the real question, which is, why is Will Johnson not on this roster? And I think that some people have jumped to conclusions. They look at the situation with Russell Tybert a couple of years ago, where he was essentially persona non grata with the team for the better part of a year. There was talk of a personality clash with Floro. They look at the situation with Jonathan Osorio, the fact that he's been a regular contributor for Toronto FC for the past year, hasn't been with the Canadian setup. People think, oh, it's got something to do with, an argument they had at the Gold Cup. People see Floro's demeanor, or they think about his age, or they make assumptions about his obstinacy or anything like that. And all of those are individual situations that can be dealt. But anyway, all of that comes in, I think, to underpin people's assumption, which is that Will Johnson must be off this roster because Floro is just being a stubborn old man, or they can't get along, or he's blacklisted. That word was used directly in a Toronto Sun column. And I was, and it came from a source. So, I don't know who the source was, but anyway, I directly asked Benito Floro, the head coach, who was the one who would potentially be doing any blacklisting. And he was crystal clear about the fact that if this team makes it to the Hex, and Will Johnson is recovered from his recent leg injury, which, presumably he will be, then he's going to be on that roster. So any idea that Johnson is blacklisted is, unless you're assuming Benito Floro lied to me, but, whatever, let people make their own judgments about that. But what he said essentially was, what I took from what he told me is that this is a situation where Benito Floro has certain expectations from what is going to do in the course of a game. His system is dependent upon the team pressing consistently, getting back in the defense, and that's going to be especially important role like the role would have been playing. Yes, Will Johnson has gotten back into regular rotation with Toronto FC. He's played in the last week. But I think that when you look at the additional requirements that come with playing in that system, going down with the travel, the San Pedro Sula, everything that's involved with that, the impression that I get from what Benito Floro has told me and what we've seen, a very similar situation with Will Johnson last summer with the Gold Cup, where he was also coming off a leg injury and decided to stay back with his club rather than play at the Gold Cup. The conclusion I am drawing based on following this team is that this is a matter of two professionals having a conversation with each other and coming to a conclusion that Will Johnson wasn't physically going to be able to give the team what Floro was going to need him to do at this point. And that people, our natural tendency is to set up a narrative structure where there's a hero and a villain. So I think that's why people assume either Floro is this crusty old man, or they go far in the other direction and say, Will Johnson is snubbing Canada. Will Johnson hates Canada. And I mean, I've spoken to Floro. I haven't spoken to Will Johnson. Hopefully Toronto-based reporters will get the chance to do that. But I think, it still is a bit, it still is a bit mind-boggling to me personally. Even if Will Johnson can give 90% or 80% or 70%, isn't that still preferable to what some of the other guys, to what some of the alternatives might be. And so, what I've done is I've put out there what Benito Floro told me, and people can, read it and make their own decisions and make their own judgments. And ultimately, as I've said, if they don't get to the Hex, Benito Floro will be out of a job in about a week's time. And if they do make it to the Hex, then like the team has done something it hasn't done in 20 years, Will Johnson theoretically gets back into the mix for November, and everything's fine. So it'll be a bit strange to see the team playing and him not there, given that he has been playing for Toronto FC. But I don't think that it's something. I don't think it's an absence that is insurmountable for the team as it's currently constructed.
19 years. That's be accurate on that one. Oh my God, 19 years. And quickly on Osorio, I almost am reluctant to ask about Jonathan Osorio because I don't feel he's part of the setup at this current time. So is the cigar just a cigar with that? Is it just a case of him not fitting the system that Floro wants to play?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, as Floro said to me, and again, this is a he said situation, like to turn it into a he said. Reporters have asked Jonathan Osorio in the past about this, and he has said that it's not an intractable personality clash. It's, he's had discussions with Floro about where he fits into the system at this point. And Floro told me that, he's looking for a little bit more on the field from Osorio right now in terms of what he brings in the attacking sense, which seems kind of strange given that Canada doesn't really attack well. And you'd think that, even if Osorio is not at 100% of what Floro wants from him, again, even 90% of what Osorio can give right now might be an upgrade on some of their current options. But again, the idea that this is a situation and that, Osorio is out of the mix forever just isn't in line with it's not in line with what Floro said. He said that if Osorio can show something a bit different in his play with Toronto FC, that the door is open for him with the national team. And I think that, the one thing that, and this sounds like a case of semantics, but it's really not, is that are bound to the idea that a national team manager is, when they name a roster, they are picking the 18 best players, right? That manager is looking at the latest FIFA, numerical rankings and saying like, okay, which 18 Canadians or Americans or whatever have the highest numbers, and you just plug them in. You have to consider balance. You have to consider where these players are at. You have to consider, the system that the team is trying to play. And so I think that Osorio not being part of the mix right now is not a repudiation of him as a player. It's indicative of the fact that, for right or for wrong, what he brings to the table does not fit in with what Benito Floro is trying to do. As I said, if the team doesn't make the Hex, Benito Floro is gone, and I'm sure that whatever manager comes in after him is going to look at Jonathan Osorio as, someone that they should probably add to the pool, assuming that whatever their system is not the exact same as Floro's. But you talk about the Toronto-centric nature of it. I mean, I think the Osorio thing has been overhyped, specifically because he plays for Toronto FC. And I mean, I'm not trying to throw anybody under the bus, but day to day, or people who watch the team day to day, they see Osorio play. They don't see other players in the player pool play, and they assume, well, I mean, I see Osorio all the time, and I talk to him, and he's a nice guy, so he obviously should be with the team, and him not being with the team must be a grave injustice. And I mean, again, is this a kid who, he's 24, is this a player that should be on the radar and part of the wider Canada player pool? But the fact that he has not been called by a national team manager in a year is not, it's not an ironclad anything. I mean, the fact that there is a situation where we can have these legitimate debates and discussions about player selection is, in a roundabout way, a good thing, right? I mean, I'm not saying it's good that Osorio is being left off the roster, but the fact that, people, that it's not just a fait accompli, like, yeah, well, we've got our team and that's that, and we have to hope nobody gets hurt because those are all the players that we could scrape together. The fact that there's now a wide enough pool that we are having these debates, and, you mentioned, I'm on the West Coast, folks looking at the situation saying, why didn't Fraser Aird get a call up? Daniil Henry, we don't know if he's match fit. Aird plays a similar kind of role. A couple other players in Vancouver, in Montreal. Kyle Becker could have been back on the radar. Floro likes him. So the fact that there are these debates to be had is a good thing, and hopefully we can continue to have them in the next 18 months or so, if this team makes it to the Hex.
So I shouldn't ask you if Colin Miller's going to call Osorio up for the Gold Cup next year then.
I don't know if Colin Miller's quite ready for his fourth go-round as interim head coach, but I would like to, for the first time in a number of years, actually have a Gold Cup where we do score a goal. That would be nice.
Oh yeah, let's talk about that next summer. All right, you mentioned him earlier. So the Daniil Henry fullback experiment, is that the world's worst name for a band, or is that something that is the world's worst idea, or something in between? You go.
I think it's a worse name for a band than it is for an on-field player experiment. I mean, look, again, I think that both of us are sitting on a similar spectrum when it comes to our views on Daniil Henry. And Duane, interrupt me if I'm mischaracterizing your stance on this at all, but this is a kid who got a lot of flack in his time at Toronto because there's nothing that Toronto sports fans love more than eating their own. We know what he brings to the table, right? And it's a matter of a player being put into a different role for a national team, which is hardly unprecedented. Is Daniil Henry the world's greatest right back? No, I wouldn't say that he is. I would say that he has shown glimpses of why Floro believes that he can excel in that role. He has had moments where it has been clear that he is still adjusting to that role. But I think that what people often forget or overlook is, again, this idea that, well, a national team, you just pick the 18 best players according to their FIFA rankings. I mean, I don't know if folks have noticed, but ever since Paul Stalteri retired, there's not exactly a glut of, natural right backs in the Canadian system. I mean, that role kind of fell to Nick Ledgerwood, who's also a converted midfielder. Daniil Henry's a converted central defender. You've got Fraser Aird coming up as well. He's a converted midfielder. I mean, there are guys who you can put into that system, but at the end of the day, when you're putting together a national team roster, you've got a finite pool that you can select from, right? I mean, Benito Floro can't go out in the transfer window and say, well, I need a right back, I'm going to splash some money. Like, no, the pool is what it is, right? And I mean, nothing against Nick Ledgerwood, but it's a situation where Floro has, or any manager who was in this job at this time would be in a spot where they need to find, okay, who's that next right back? Who's that person, behind Ledgerwood in the pecking order? You could say David Edgar is better suited to that role. He has played it in the past for club and country, but as I think we'll see on Friday against Honduras and possibly even Tuesday against El Salvador, he's probably going to step into a central midfield role in the absence of Will Johnson. So his versatility is on display there. So as I'll say the same thing I've said, ever since the Doniel right back experiment began, which is, it's not ideal, but have you got a better idea? I mean, I'm doing the emoji shoulder shrug right now. Like, I'm all ears if someone's got a better solution at this point.
Train better right back. It's one of the most technical positions, the modern fullback right now, and Canada just doesn't have the player like that. So improvise, as you say. Let's move past that though and sort of look a little bit further up the pitch. We talked about Will Johnson already, but in terms of how do you replace what he brings when he's fully fit and playing for Canada, is there a player on this roster that can fill in that role and do something that remotely is close?
I alluded to it a second ago, but before I do that, I might just finish up the fullback discussion with something that came to mind. No, just a silly, pithy remark, which is that I don't know if Ashley Lawrence has any brothers. And if she does, I don't know how old they are or whether they've ever played soccer in their lives. But if we get to the Hex or wherever we go on from this point on, that's something worth investigating. Because the Ashley Lawrence left back experiment has gone gangbusters for the women's team. And so maybe there's something in that genetic pool that might help us on the men's side as well. In terms of that central midfield role and replacing what Will Johnson brings, it's, the passion and the work ethic are always there with Will Johnson. And if you're looking for the most for point in terms of this player pool, I think you're looking at, as I said, David Edgar. We have seen Floro put him into that position in some recent games, that central midfield position. He brings size, he brings experience, he brings that work ethic. He's another guy, who obviously loves going out there and playing for the national team, even if they kind of ignored him for the first few years of his career, but that's bygones be bygones. In terms of bringing a little bit of offensive threat as well, I think that he brings more to the table than other guys who you could theoretically see in the center of midfield, be it Sam Piet or Adam Straith or whoever the case may be. I think that you're going to see, I think it's pretty safe to predict that Atiba Hutchinson is going to be sitting in that holding role. And in front of him, you've got no Will Johnson. You've also got no Julian de Guzman due to injury. He will be there with the team, though, in a advisory role or some such thing, or later for Floro, because Julian speaks pretty good Spanish, I understand, from his years playing in Spain. But I would think you're going to see Scott Arfield, certainly, and probably also David Edgar sitting in front of Atiba Hutchinson. Three experienced guys. Arfield not experienced with Canada necessarily, but experience playing at a high level in some big games in the Premier League this year, of course. On the left, you've got Junior Hoylett. On the right, we're all thinking maybe it's Tesho. It's going to be Ricketts. Of course, it's going to be Ricketts. And I love to say Ricketts. I mean, I don't care. Let the haters going to hate, but I would love nothing more than to see him get some redemption either in this game in San Pedro Sula or at some future point in World Cup qualifying. I mean, then you've got Kyle Laramee, center back sitting behind all of them, a center back probably starting in goal. That's 5 center backs. That's about par for the course for Floro. And keep your fingers crossed.
Speaking of fingers crossed, although 2-0 will put them through almost assuredly, unless there's a major upset in Mexico. But let's not go there quite yet. I was asked on another show, Daniel, I was asked why Laramee can't score for Canada the same way he scores for Orlando. And speaking of pithy answers, my answer quite simply was Kaká's not Canadian. Who's going to service him?
I mean, when you were formulating that question, I was going to say, because Kaká doesn't play for Canada, and you cut a few words out of it, but the same basic idea. I mean, who is going to provide service? I mean, you've seen glimpses of that in terms of what Junior Hoylett has been able to bring. I think, Tesho playing in that winger role has shown some good things for Canada. But, you're never it's like apples and oranges between what Larin sees in his club career with Orlando and what he sees with the national team. And so I think that, he has had some opportunities that he has squandered, most notably at the last Gold Cup against El Salvador. Every player is going to miss chances. I'm sure I've ragged on, Fernando Torres on your show before. I'm going to do it again. That man is still think of how many chances he's missed, and he's still, anyway. But I don't know why Fernando Torres is a target of scoring, but
repressed Chelsea and Liverpool hate. I don't know.
Oh, it could be. I don't know. There's a whole miasma of junk going on in my head, predicating everything I say. But Larin is never going to get the same level of service with the national team that he does with his club team for 2 simple reasons. One, as I just said, the pool is what the pool is. It's going to be decent, but you can't go out in the transfer window and say, well, we need an attacking mid with better crossing. Let's go find them. The national team is what it is. And as it currently stands, it's a team that's set up to defend well, play structured, and then ideally get something on the counterattack. And that is, that's a situation where we have seen Larin thrive with Orlando, but he has thrived first and foremost because of the interplay that he's developed with his teammates. And I think you also can't discount the fact that this is a 21-year-old kid playing in CONCACAF in the international game as a lone striker. There's a whole lot more heaped on his shoulders. And so I think that some of the criticism he has endured to this point in his national team career hasn't necessarily been fair. I do think, obviously, that he is going to need to start producing if Canada is going to have a chance of getting anywhere in this World Cup cycle, or even in potentially the next World Cup cycle. If the team can make the most of the set he gets and put Larin into situations to succeed, he has shown with Orlando and with Canada that he can make the most of those opportunities. And let's just hope against hope that it presents itself that way in the next week.
All right. One last question here before we let you go, because we are getting a little tight on time. So did you have any chance to talk to him about Jamar Dixon? I'm curious about that call up.
I had a list of player name ? In my interview prep notes. So I did not have a chance to ask about Ottawa Fury midfielder Jamar Dixon, about whom I think not very much is known. I would imagine that it's a depth call up. It's a kid. Well, again, kid. He's 27, I think. He's been playing in Finland for a number of years. Got a call up. I think it was the first camp of this year, friendly against the U.S. That's his only with the senior national team. Been playing in Ottawa, having a decent level of success, and he's there as midfield depth. I mean, I think that the midfield, as I just described it, is pretty much what we can suspect for both games. And then depending on the situation, you've got some of the guys I mentioned there, Tesho or Ricketts. Whoever doesn't start is an option off the bench. Piet or Straith if it's a defensive kind of situation. And so, I would be surprised if Dixon gets in there at any point in either of these two games. But, getting a player in there and getting them some experience with a training camp, it's a nice little storyline to have all 5 MLS and NASL teams represented on this roster. It won't mean much if they can't get results, and it'll actually might be an indictment of the 5 teams. But if they do, oh boy, it's time to smile.
Question, very quickly, important. On Friday at 8 a.m., should it be Scotch or tequila that I start with?
Geographically, tequila is closer to Honduras than Scotch would be, so I would suggest going with Scotch. If we're doing the geographical thing, if there's any used in northern Norway or Greenland or Iqaluit or anything like that, you could geographically go in the other direction, find some spirits from South Africa or Tierra del Fuego or, Tristan da Cunha or just something remote. Or you could just,
I got it.
No, or you could not drink. That's
fair enough.
Also,
yeah. I think what we'll go with is the Russian vodka because, hey, you got to dream. You got to dream, Daniel.
Oh, but wait, how does that apply to the next World Cup cycle? If you're using that same logic, you have to teetotal your way through the entire 2022 campaign. Yeah, in the grand scheme, yes.
All right. Daniel Squizzato for MLS Soccer and various other places. Anything you want to pitch other than the article we've already talked about before we say goodbye?
Folks can read MLSsoccer.com. I'll be following the team along. I won't be in San Pedro Sula, but I'll be writing about the team throughout the course of this next week and a half. And Tuesday night, you can read something I've written that is a thinly veiled attempt to hide utter jubilation or utter inconsolable desolation. So either way, tell me how effective my writing mask is. It's appreciated.
All right, fair enough. Did you know that the 8-1 game, I wrote 2 articles before that game so I could post on Final Whistle? So out there is an article that I wrote that was in an alternative universe that would have been published. So don't write it before it's bad luck. That's what I'm getting at here.
Off my computer and not turn it back on until Friday. That's not going to happen. Why am I even pretending that'll happen? Oh, God help us all.
Enjoy the sea air, Daniel. We'll talk soon.
Yeah, thanks, Duane.
You are listening to Soccer Today, live on SPN Radio. Visit sportspodcastingnetwork.com for more.
Tequila!
I might go with some Scotch, or I might actually continue and go on and just try to keep my composure and keep alcohol out of my system.
All right. If you are listening out there, in particular, yes, it is too early to start drinking now. Okay. All right.
But Duane, for a long time, we didn't talk about this game. We were wondering if we're going to have to talk about this game. We have to talk about it.
First rule of Fight Club is do not talk about Fight Club.
We have to now.
Second rule of Fight Club is you do not talk about Fight Club.
Yeah, but we have to. It's just a few days away, so let's talk about this game now.
Oh, good God. All right. Nice interview. Thanks again to Daniel. We pre-recorded that last night because Daniel's out in the West Coast, as you know, and it would have been a little too early for him this morning because he had other stuff going on. So I do appreciate him giving his time. And as always with Daniel, once you get talking to him, first off, you start laughing because he's a funny guy. And second off, there's lots of great stuff there. So you just want to keep talking to him. So it was a long interview, but I do hope you enjoyed it. The question, we were mid-joking about it, but that whole 8-1 question off the start, Kevin, what it comes down to is that it's done, in my opinion, and why I continue to support his choices, even though I sometimes question them just like anyone else, is that he kept the scoring down, consistently kept them in games. And to me, heading into this one with the Hornets Nest game, which was always the game that the whole cycle was based on this game on Friday, basically.
Yep.
He's put him in the position I think that I give them a chance to get that 0-0, and it really is that. And that's going to be a hell of a stressful 90 minutes because it's such a thin line, right?
It's not just that, Duane. When I look at Floro, not just because he has that grandpa aura with him, but he reassured the team in a way. He made them play in a way that it could find their markers, especially defensively, and they were able to concede less and were reassured defensively. So that's the word that comes out when I watch Canada play under Benito Floro compared to before. I'm a bit more reassured. So there's that.
Yeah, it comes down to I don't believe that we will win. I believe that we could maybe
that we not concede. All right. Duane, Canada Soccer announced today, just before we went on the air today, Jason DeVos, former TiVo, probably still TSN analyst, now Director of Development for Canada Soccer, for the Canadian Soccer Association at the highest level. He has been in a proponent of development, of trusting the clubs to bring out the national team, to have that communication, to have that ability for them to actually develop. It's going to be very interesting going forward what he does bring, because he was the one very openly talking about what needs to be done. They said, you know what, do it. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens with that nomination today.
This job was created, first off, which I think is something people need to realize, that the CSA has gone out of their way to create a special job, to spend the money on it, to invest. The title of their press release is CSA invests in grassroots. It doesn't really mention DeVos that much, but it's been a position. And actually, I wrote about this in January 2015, 2011. That would have been going back a little while ago, where I basically said this exact role was what needed. And in further to that, the title of the article that I wrote was holding on for a hero, a strong leader needed to fix Canadian grassroots problems. And if you go into that, and I'll just load this up.
You probably named DeVos in that article, I guess.
Tell you the genesis of the article I wrote. And this is January 2011, 2015. I don't know why I keep saying 2011. January 15. And it was immediately after the Canadian U20s had failed. And the Canadian U20, this is Kyle Aron's class that we're talking about here. So there was a lot of hope around that U20 team that they could do something special, that they could maybe emulate Ian Hume's U20 team that went to the quarterfinals, narrowly lost to Spain in stoppage time, which is the high water mark sort of post-Gold Cup for Canadian men's soccer. We thought maybe there was a chance for that to happen again, and they bombed out of qualifying. And there was a lot of sort of hand-wringing and the whole 9 yards. And it's sort of, there was also this group called USLO, USLO, which everyone pronounced as ULO. But anyway, they were like a group that was trying to take advantage of the discontent within Canadian soccer at the time by sort of getting that like pay-to-play sort of results-based house league model back and running the way that Canadian soccer run for years. Anyway, that's getting a little too detailed. You can read the article. I linked it out this morning if you want. But I just wrote this. I'm just trying to get in here. Basically, I said that quite literally no one else in the country fits the description other than DeVos is what I wrote. The instinct is to fear. My instinct is to fear this. Sorry, let me just find this here, Kevin. I'm going to. Yeah, I said it would be exceptionally difficult in times of thankless task, this job, because what it is you have to convince people at the grassroots that the CSA's planning is. There's a lot of mistrust about the CSA because of the failures that have existed on the scoreboard level. So it's a thankless job to go in there. So what you need is a strong individual that's kind of intimidating. And if you've ever stood beside Jason DeVos, you know that he's an intimidating guy. He's big.
He's very tall. He's 6'4" something like that. He's very tall.
Yeah, and he's filled out a bit since his playing years. So he's a big guy. So he's a big guy that could have played hockey too, and I believe he played at a high level. So he's kind of built like a defenseman, not necessarily a center back, if you know what I mean. So yeah, this was the job that I think was written with Jason DeVos in mind. It's basically he's going to go across the country. He's going to go to the grassroots. And he's going to tell people at the grassroots how they can do things to better fit a model which will ultimately benefit them. And that's always been, to me, Kevin, when we're talking about long-term player development issues, has always been the biggest weakness in the CSA's plan, is they haven't really articulated. They're beyond us geeks. they haven't articulated what they're doing and why they're doing it and why it works in such a way that it's understandable to people, because we still hear it. We still hear it all the time. We had Greg Brady on this show during the Euros, right? And I like Greg Brady, and he's a soccer fan. But I had a Twitter exchange with him a few weeks ago where he again was pushing this stupid idea that the only thing long-term player development plan is about is the no scorekeeping. And this is completely derailed the agenda and the messaging along these plans, is this no score thing, because that's all people want to talk about, because they think it's this, what they think, Kevin, is it's this soft kind of modern safe space kind of thing that's happening within soccer. It's not at all what it's about. And
exactly. And because people get the wrong idea of they're not keeping score, that's not what it's about. It's just that the end goal be all is not to win a game, but it's to develop a player that's going to be better after he joined your program, right?
Exactly.
The basic idea, right?
Yeah, and DeVos having a guy whose primary role is to get out there and articulate this in a way that the people at the grassroots will trust has been key and has always been key. And it was key in January 2015 when I wrote that article. And that article was out of an exchange I had with DeVos on Twitter. So obviously he had the same idea. I'm not claiming that I invented this job. DeVos invented this job and was planting enough seeds into me that I understood him back then, is what it comes down to. This is a good move. Anyway, I'm sort of going a little bit all over the place because I'm excited by this. I woke up to this news today and I was like, oh my God, they did it.
Finally did it, yeah.
It was needed, because right now, as I said, without having that someone steering the ship at all levels of the ocean, you're going to sink. That's kind of the analogy that I'm going to do here. Now you finally have a captain. Captain DeVos to the rescue. And I credit to Jason, too, who is sometimes he's an opinionated guy, and I like and respect Jason, but he's also so opinionated that he rubs some people the wrong way. But he's like a bulldog in the sense that he will get that opinion out there and out there and out there, and he won't stop until people understand exactly what it is and the right thing is made. And I do believe that he has the right ideas.
And Duane, there is something to say about people that have opinion, but don't just have opinion. They do something about those opinions. And that's the job, that he's doing something about it. And we'll see where it goes. And we're going to test those opinions, those ideas. And that's the goal, right? If you're wrong, it's fine, but you need to figure it out. And that's how we're going to figure it out.
Yeah, and that was where I was going with that. I'm going to give him absolute full 100% credit for advocating for this position. As I just said, I think that he probably was trying to create this position for himself for a couple years now, and putting his head basically on that chopping block now next. For he is going to be the target if people don't agree with the grassroots initiatives, if people don't agree with what's happening. Now DeVos is out there equally. He's put himself out there, and he deserves credit for that, because there's a lot of people that bitch and moan behind the scenes, but don't do anything. But the people that are going to change this game in this country are the ones that get out there and do that. Jason DeVos here. I think about Dino Rossi, my friend Dino, who years ago, he was the one that was making those black T-shirts that we wore back in 2008. But now he runs Ligue 1 Ontario. He's putting himself out there. He's actually doing the work. He's not complaining about it. Jason's doing the same thing here, and I think he deserves a lot of credit for that. And we'll watch this carefully, because I think it's a great initiative, and hopefully it will help the progress forward. There is progress out there. Yeah. It's always was going to be slow. It always was going to be more likely for 2020. So it's interesting that this announcement's made just before the game in anticipation.
Whatever happens on Friday, it'll be better in a few years.
Yeah. And all right. In terms of, to go back to Friday to end the show, they can't be eliminated Friday.
And they can't qualify, though.
They can't qualify, but
they can
that's technical. That's technical in every way. If they get a result in Honduras, they are pretty close to through. They still have to do something against El Salvador. If they get Honduras, it's going to take a miracle they won't be eliminated, but it will take a miracle to continue on. They'll need to score like 4 goals against El Salvador and hope Mexico really turns things around in the other way.
Two quick news before we wrap up the show today. That's concerning to our fans as well. One concerns MLS, maybe the other one England. Wayne Rooney will take his international retirement after the 2018 World Cup, but he remains the captain of England for now. Yes, I know you. I heard you laughing. But if we go back to England, Man United, Bastian Schweinsteiger might consider MLS an option if he cannot regain a spot in the starting 11. He has no ill feeling towards Mourinho. He mentioned in a press conference earlier today that he had a long discussion with Mourinho, and it's up to him to deserve a spot to play with the new type of lineup that they have. And if he cannot regain that spot, he will consider Major League Soccer, and he named MLS as a potential target. I've heard that before. It's becoming quite a trend now. It's quite trendy to say that.
Yeah, well, we talked about him specifically last week too, as well. The other piece of news, of course, the people that listen to us will be interested in is the Sebastian Giovinco injury news. He's out for 4 weeks. We're not going to get into the details of that or debate it right now because obviously there's not much to say. There's a 2-week break right now for MLS, which is lucky on that hand. Lots of time to digest this. It is. We'll focus more on that today, but that certainly is going to be a major storyline to follow and to watch and to consider in the days ahead as it relates to Toronto FC. They're going to test that theory out there that they're more than one player that's going to be tested in the days ahead, Kevin.
He was on Drogba's thigh a couple of days off from Montreal back, and it's the right timing for that type of injury too. So that will be interesting going forward.
All right, 2 guests today. Thanks to Wes. Thanks to Daniel. We're going to end the show right now, and we'll be back tomorrow with USL Wednesday. Until that time, as always, Kevin, say goodbye.
Till tomorrow, 11 a.m. on YouTube.com, on Facebook, Twitter, anywhere you get the podcast, iTunes. Well, have a great soccer. You were listening to SPN, the Sports Podcasting Network. Visit us, sportspodcastingnetwork.com.